Well, today is the longest day of the year. It is summer solstice 2024, but it wasn't my longest day of the year. My longest day of the year was my Alaska adventure that ended as a Lifeflight by helicopter to Anchorage Providence Hospital for a near-death experience. I mean, this video is a bit more sobering than the usual, and it is the first one I've made that is actually of me on the camera, which feels pretty weird. But there's been a large number of people who have asked what in the world happened. So on Sunday, June 2nd, Jill and I flew back from my sister's wedding, Audra, that was in Edmonton, Canada, and we were hoping to visit someone in the hospital, but Jill wasn't feeling well. And so Jill went ahead and took a COVID test, and it was positive. So we spent the week low-key. A COVID test for me was negative a few days later, and I started having shortness of breath later that week. Each day it was progressing worse to the point that I couldn't go up and down the stairs at our house without being out of breath. If I walked to the mailbox, I had to take a break on the way there. And I just assumed it was a false negative COVID test, and I Googled the symptoms and I had the confirmation that maybe it was. So days passed, and really lots of days. And it finally began to get worse with some chest pain. And every time I did any activity, I was out of breath. There'd be pressure that would go up the back of my neck if I continued, and if I stopped for a few minutes, I'd be fine. If I really just worked in my office, all was good. I started wondering on Friday, June 14th, with the pressure in my neck that maybe something had to do with blood pressure. I had just had my annual physical with very good blood pressure on May 14th, and so I went to Walmart and sat for the blood pressure machine, and on the screen it came up with a red notice that said very high, and it was 153/88. So I hopped in the car and went straight to an urgent care. I gave them my best rundown about COVID, about my Apple Watch had told me my heart had gone from a 65 average to 57 for a few days, and now it was back up. My oxygen level repeatedly showed me 95 to 96% when it's usually 99. My blood pressure was all of a sudden high. All of those circumstances were essentially dismissed and misdiagnosed as a lung inflammation issue after another negative COVID test. So I took a breathing test. I was administered a breathing treatment, and when I said it hadn't improved, I was asked to walk around the parking lot to see if I was sure that it hadn't. It had not. I was prescribed 5 days of steroid pill regimen, Advair inhaler and albuterol inhaler, and told, just give these a couple days. If you want to see if you have, maybe you have a blood clot, there's a real slight chance you can go to the lab at the hospital for a D-dimer test. If you really want to make sure it's not something more, go to the ER. But when I asked about the ER and his opinion, I was told nothing he saw indicated this needed an ER visit, and that he just had to say that, but it was up to me. So I again mentioned the blood pressure and was summarily dismissed that my shortness of breath had nothing to do with my blood pressure, as it had come down by the time I was there. So I went to the hospital and took the D-dimer test, where they took extra blood in case any other tests might be needed later, but not to the ER. So Jill and I were scheduled for vacation in a remote cabin in Prince William Sound on Saturday, June 16th, but our boat was in Homer Harbor, and so I needed to pick it up. And again, all was great as long as I did no real physical activity, so I decided I would just stay the night in the boat at Homer Harbor on Friday, June 14th, and take my son Connor and his girlfriend Sadie's family fishing on Saturday, June 15th, bring the boat home to pack, and head out to Prince William Sound the next day. It took me a lot of trips up and down the ramp, carrying things to prep the boat for the night, and the next day, I went to sleep. After completing the 6 pills of steroid for the day, the Advair, and the albuterol huffing, I slept restlessly and woke up around 2 a.m. and needed to go to the bathroom, but I was annoyed that I'd have to walk down the docks, up the harbor ramps, down the parking lot just to pee, so I peed in a bottle. When I got back in bed, I was winded. I was short on breath and had some chest pain. I decided I'd research the medicines. This is about 2 o'clock in the morning that I was on now to see if they had side effects of high blood pressure and feelings of indigestion, which they did, and it was also then confirmed by the pharmacist later. That made sense. But my chest continued to hurt. I had no numbness in my arm. I wasn't short on breath anymore. It fit, some of the side effects of the prescribed medicines that I'd never been on. But I searched the Homer Hospital in case it got worse. And about an hour later, it stopped. I fell asleep and woke up in the morning. We went fishing for the day. Caught loads of fish. Halibut, Pacific cod, pollock, skate, sculpin, Irish lures, all kinds. It was awesome. But when I explained to Sadie's dad, Steven, my symptoms, he immediately said, "That sounds like a heart attack. You need to get that checked out." Well, I demurred, referring to the steroid side effects, possibly, asymptomatic COVID from almost 2 weeks earlier now. Maybe it was long COVID inflammation. The doctor thinks it's a lung issue. Well, we started to head home. We docked the boat at the launch. I went to walk to get the truck and had to take a break twice. I cranked the boat on the trailer, drove a few hours home just fine. And when I got home, I went to disconnect the boat from the trailer and had to take a break while cranking the leg lifter. And I thought to myself, I can't go to the middle of nowhere in Prince William Sound if I can't do this small thing. I went in and told Jill about Homer in the night, about Steven's comments, which I'd already texted and reconfirmed his thoughts from him. So we went to the ER. We live in a small town and our hospital doesn't have a lot of advanced care, but they did not mess around with me. My butt barely hit the intake chair before I was back in a room, EKG'd, hooked up to all the monitors, IV line in on both arms, blood taken. And while it was being tested for what is called troponin and other stuff, the doctor came in and said to me that, he can't force me to stay, but that if I stayed until Monday, I could get a stress test that morning instead of having to make an appointment. And so we just decided to stay. A little bit later, he came back and said, your troponin levels, which is a chemical only found in blood when the heart has already sustained damage, the test only really detects it above 14, which is way higher than the normal already. He kind of said that 20 is the pay attention number. Mine was 118. They test a few hours later to see if it went up or down, and it was 114. So we thought, let's have him test my blood that's in the lab from the day before, and it was 100. And this number peaks 24 hours after an event. So his thought was that, I had not had a heart attack yet, but that I was very close and damage was already occurring. So they would Lifeflight me by helicopter to Anchorage. Jill prayed with me, and I said goodbye to Jill. At that time, I was not sure that I would see her again. She went home to prepare for driving to Anchorage in the morning. Connor and Sadie planned to join her. I slept a few hours in the ER and was picked up at 3:45 a.m. and flown to Providence, Anchorage emergency room by LifeMed. I was run through all the same tests, answered all the questions. A few hours later, a shift change happened and my new nurse came in. When he asked if I had any questions, I said, did they test my troponin levels this morning? I said, oh yeah, let me check. And he gets on the computer and he just says, they're 2,000. And it was at that time I thought that I would possibly die. No one else had arrived yet. A little bit later, Brady arrived. Since he lived in Anchorage, Jill, Connor, and Sadie would show up a bit later. The doctors and nurses had gone to work. I was being pumped with blood thinners, nitroglycerin under my tongue and through the IV. The cardiologist came in and told me that I had had a small heart attack. At which point I explained to him the value of context for test numbers that are given to patients. Going from under 14 as normal to 118 being on a LifeMed helicopter to Anchorage to 2,000 with no context given. You please tell people what those numbers mean a little bit better in the future. So I went in to an emergency angiogram and angioplasty where I received one stent. I recovered in the hospital overnight, came home the next day where I am now. The cardiologist told me that my artery was 100% blocked. It was the only one with blockage. And there's another part that minimally has some stuff in it, but this is the only one with any significant blockage, and it was 100%. But since I'd never smoked, never vaped, never drank alcohol, was active and exercised regularly, I ate healthily, and was only a little overweight, he said that my body had created collateral arteries where over what could have been years of worsening blockage, my body grew their own bypass arteries around the blockage. Between those and the possibility that the blockage intermittently opened over the course of those 8 and 9 days, maybe with the blood pressure increases, and that kept this experience from becoming a massive heart attack and possibly fatal. So the next morning they performed an echocardiogram to see that I indeed have damage to my heart, but that it will not be permanent damage. I need to take it easy as I ramp up the next few weeks. I can participate in all my regular activities over the next month as I'm able, and I'll start a cardio rehabilitation program in the middle of July. And the doctor expects that I will be better than I was before this occurred, now that the blockage is gone. I'm sure I will research and speculate how it all happened to be that this one single artery was fully blocked. My family does not really have a history of this. But I will say, stress is real. It is extremely detrimental to a person's health, year after year after year. Pastors are highly susceptible to this. The body keeps the score. At some point, the stress stops being a season and starts being your life. Get things checked out. Take care of yourself. Make necessary changes and make needed boundaries. I love Jesus and I look forward to the day I'll meet him face to face, but I'd rather not do that soon. I love my life and I'm grateful that we can wait a bit on that. So thank you to everyone who prayed and for the many, many little miracles, serendipitous situations, #science with God's help and healing, along with the doctors and nurses at Kenai Peninsula Hospital in Soldotna, the LifeMed pilot and crew, and the doctors and nurses from Anchorage Providence and the Alaska Heart and Vascular Institute, and to my wife and children who will certainly keep me on a path toward health. I'm grateful to be here. Thanks for listening.